Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, for a special episode recorded at the Arizona Rural Schools Association Conference, here's your host, Ty White.
All right. So first question, and I've been doing this to break the ice all day, help make people relax. Would you sort of tell our listeners, what's your name? What are you here? Why did you decide to come to the Resilient Rural ARSA Conference?
My name is Erick Francis. I'm an author, an educator, and presenter. I've written a few books. I'm a Solution Tree author, which has a booth here. My most recent two books are what's called Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, which takes it as a concept, language, and framework for teaching and learning. And my newest one is called Inquiring Minds Want to Learn, where basically you use questioning not just to assess, but also activate, advance, and augment learning. One of the reasons why I came up here for the AZ Rural Association Conference is because I believe very strongly about rural education here in Arizona and the opportunities that you guys could have. I used to work at the State Department here at ADE, and I also know most of the conferences where they're held. They're either held in Maricopa County or in Phoenix, that urban center, or they're held down in Tucson, or possibly, maybe one here in Flagstaff or one here in Prescott. But that takes a lot for you guys to have to drive all the way there. So what I really wanted to do is to bring, the professional development here more so to the rural communities where you didn't have to feel like you had to drive 5 hours or 6 hours to get someplace. I should be the one. And that's the thing where I talk about have PD will travel or have professional learning PL and will travel. And that's something actually I really wish I could do more in the rural communities here in Arizona, where coming in, provide professional learning, provide continuous learning. I enjoy visiting the small towns and really trying to help out and give back because, the education system here in Arizona, they made me a teacher and I believe it has a lot of potential, but you just need more access and you need more availability to you guys.
Okay. Is this your first time at the ARSA conference?
It is.
What's been your biggest takeaway so far?
Really a lot of the dedication that I see a lot of the leadership having here, a lot of the dedication to succeed, the believing in the kids, the believing that all kids can learn and all kids can succeed. I think that's the greatest thing to see, that you see a lot of committed leaders and even though they don't have much to work with, they believe that they can work with what they have and make kids excel. So I think that's really the great thing. It's like just hearing the stories and seeing people hearing like, wow, our kids are doing this and our kids are doing that. And really, bringing the realization that you're not sentenced to your location. Anyone can do anything anywhere. And really, I think that's the greatest thing to see is that these leaders, they're talking about like, oh, our kids are performing as this and our kids are this. You have a school in Congress Elementary. It was an A-rated school that's, got an award for that. I run into some old colleagues I know from, and they recognize me from my days when I was at the Department of Education. I used to work there many years ago. And seeing just the growth and seeing, how they're doing. And I think that's the great thing is seeing like just the great stuff that's happening in rural Arizona.
Okay. The next question I've got for you, you've answered already, but I want to put it to you again because there might be other angles that you could share on it. There might be something else you would. So you're here representing Solution Tree and you have an audience right now. Like, why don't you tell rural leaders and rural decision makers really describe what it is that you can offer to them?
I think what I can offer is really an ambition and dedication and a belief that all kids can learn. And my belief is that all kids can succeed. We just need to figure out how they can succeed. And it may not be the way that we understand, and it may not be the way that we can teach them in a way that we understand. But what are we doing to really help kids learn the way that they can learn? And what are we doing to make sure that all kids can learn? And it may not be in the time frame we have. It may be if we have the end of a quarter, well, they may not get it. So what interventions are we doing? I really also think that, and I ask this question to a lot of school leaders where I say, well, what do you want? Do you want the kids to learn? Do you want the kids to achieve the standard? Or do you want the kids to pass the assessment, the state assessment? And most of the time they'll say all three. And I said, then it needs to start with the standard. And you need to figure out how can we get the kids to, through, and beyond the standard. The other big thing is understanding that when you go to a grade level as a student, let's say you're in fifth grade, you're not a fifth grader entering fifth grade. You're a fourth grader, or wherever that last assessment you took said that you were, or wherever was the year that you got knocked off the rails. Now, let's say you were proficient in your assessments from the year before. Something happens over the summer. Your parents get divorced. Someone has to move. Someone passes away. Some sort of disruption in your life. Where is that child when they're coming in your classroom? And what I like to try to do is help teachers understand is that when people come to you, no one's at grade level. When children come to you, no one's at grade level. What is grade level? That's the standard. I want you to look at that as the finish line in a race. It can be a running race, it can be a car race, a horse race. That's where all kids need to reach and cross. Do we believe that all kids can do that? If you don't think the kids can reach the finish line, then we have a bigger problem. But it's up to us to figure out where they are on the track and where they're strong on the track and how can they use their strengths to get to that finish line. So when you run a race, there's always a part in it that you either pewter out or you're not running at the level that you should where you started. So how can I use where I'm strong to launch me further? How can I pace myself? Maybe I'm teaching you how to do this in a way that's not going to help you win the race or achieve the standard, but how could you run it? And I think that's the big thing, is that believing that all kids can learn, believing that we need to get all kids to achieve the standard. And again, it might not be in the time frame that we have. And what can we do to really make the students and really help the students own their learning? I mean, it's not what you're teaching today, and it's not the exit ticket out your door, and it's not also the test at the end of the week or even the state assessment. What kind of experience are you creating for a child that they take with them, not only over a timeless period, but also maybe for the rest of their lives? Are you that teacher that they're going to look at 10, 15 years from now and say, hey, I remember when I did this in your class? What kind of experiences? And that's what I want to do really with helping a lot of rural schools, is that how can we make these experiences? How can we create these experiences for these kids that they take it with them? And we have these students for 7 to 8 hours straight. Okay. There's 24 hours in a day. Hopefully they're sleeping for 8. And then you have, again, 16 left. Now you have them for 7, consistent. What can you do in those 7 hours to make that the most productive, safest time for that child, and make that child feel like, oh, I want to come back tomorrow and see what I can do tomorrow? So that's something I think I can really help out with a lot of schools up here.
Sure.
Sorry.
Tell me about your rural experience. We were talking before we started, and you mentioned about teaching in Blythe.
Yes.
I guess I want to hear some of that and some more of.
You know, it was really interesting. And once upon a time, it was very hard to get a teaching job in Central Phoenix, in urban Phoenix. So I went to a ASU recruitment for teachers, and there was this district in Blythe, California, Palo Verde Unified. Not the one that's out here in Arizona, but it's a different one. And yeah, come to Blythe. And they sold it. They sold it like a Norman Rockwell town. And when I got there, it was more like a John Steinbeck novel, because it was very interesting. And I grew up in New York. I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in upstate New York and suburban upstate New York and Albany. But this was my first real rural experience living, working. I think the biggest takeaway when I was there was seeing just the strength of community, how the community bonds were formed, and how the community really ran and controlled everything and really kind of even decided your fate. I mean, if the community accepted you and embraced you, you were good. If they didn't, you were not good. So a lot of it also was that belief that all kids can learn. And I believe that. And I had a lot of kids there. And it's also a lot of stereotypes that people think, well, it's rural, that, there's a lot of poverty, or there's a lot of, farmers' kids, or, slower. And it's not. It's just different. It's a different environment. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I was young, so, I didn't have really a lot of, connections or roots there, as much as they tried to get roots, because, they introduce you to the local person, telling, hey, this is so-and-so's daughter, why don't you go? And I knew I was always going to move back, but I really look back on that experience. Like, I'm glad and I'm appreciative of it. And I think it also made me more sensitive about what kind of supports rural districts get for professional learning. What are they doing to enhance their effectiveness? And it's hard because there's not many places you can stay. It's costly. So, but what can we do? Because it shouldn't be that you guys in the rural areas have to go and travel. I mean, sometimes take 3 or 4 hours to get to an airport to fly to some other place. And that's expensive. What can we do to bring the experience to you? And I think that's really what I'm really focused on, even in here in Arizona, is that there's a lot of great places, a lot of districts in Arizona that have a centralized location where you guys can come to and receive that. You shouldn't have to go to the conferences. And to tell you the truth, most often than not, the conferences, when you go to those big places, it's an all expenses paid vacation. And I think that's the big thing, is that what can we do to bring the experience to you, and how can we educate each other? Like, here I'm coming in with these strategies, but what I would do for you in a rural community would probably be different than what I would do in maybe New York or Illinois when I work there, or even North Carolina. And I work actually with a number of rural communities out there that are unfortunately hit hard by this hurricane right now. And it's just a whole different thing. But what can we do to work together? It shouldn't be that someone with professional development does a swoop in like Superman. They're not a savior, they're a collaborator. So, and if someone says, you don't know my kids, well, you tell me about your kids. Do you believe your kids can do this? And sometimes you'll hear the surprising answer, like, well, this is hard for our kids. Well, yeah, but this is the race they have to run. This is what they have to do to succeed. If you don't believe the kids can succeed, then we're already putting the cart in front of the horse. We need to believe that all kids can succeed, and we need to look at that. And I think sometimes we need some guidance, support to say, okay, what could I do? And I like to compare teaching to kind of like being a soldier. You get all this training to be a soldier, but then all of a sudden the explosions are happening all around you, and then they're firing live ammunition at you. You're on the beach of Normandy. I'm sorry, but the stuff you learned in basic training is just out the window. And sometimes you need someone who's the outsider, who can kind of look at it from an objective lens, an unbiased lens, but also have the courage to say to superintendents and boards, hey, this is not working. And I know this is hard to hear, but this is not working. What can we do? Or not even say it's not working, but how's this working? Working great for who? Working great for me. Well, how's it working for the kids? Fine. All of them? And I think that's sometimes the bigger thing. What I want to try to do is bring that professional element. There's no reason why a child in a rural location, a location that's got a population of less than 1,000 or 500, children can do anything. We just got to teach them. And we got to figure out how to reach them to teach them, and teach them to reach them.
What does the expression "the rural advantage" mean to you? I'm going to pause you for a second. So sorry.
Yeah, I'm doing too. So we'll cut down the edit. Okay. The rural advantage, I think, is community. I live in a suburban community. I don't know my neighbors. And it's really interesting to think about, because I grew up again in New York, and you knew who everyone was on your block, and you knew, and I think that's the thing about the rural advantage is the strong sense of community. I think there's a benefit and there's also a drawback because it also makes you insular. So, and you have to ask, why do we do this? And if your answer is because that's the way it's always been done, well, maybe that worked one time. I would say, again, the advantage is how can a community come together that not just even academically, but social, emotionally, behaviorally, that child's family, that child's, lineage, that child's legacy of that family, how to address that. And I think that's really what the rural advantage is. And you're also, I think also the rural advantage is you have a stronger appreciation of life. I think a lot of people in the big city and a lot of people in the suburban areas, we take for granted, we don't take advantage of what we have. And I think in the rural locations that you're more appreciative of nature. You're more appreciative when you can go to more metropolitan areas. And I think it gives you a stronger appreciation. So that's what I think the rural advantage is.
Okay. One of the things that I love about this ARSA conference, we're gearing up. We're going to head over into the awards dinner in a moment. I really appreciate the way they recognize and celebrate 10 outstanding teachers. Ultimately, I know one gets picked as the teacher of the year. All of these teachers have done amazing things. And so when I sort of reflect on that, it leads me to think about the teachers that impacted me. You got anyone that's helped shape your life you'd like to shout out or recognize?
Definitely my father. My father, when things were coming out, so my father's an interesting guy. He lost his legs in a car accident in 1965. And he was one of the unsung leaders, and there's more stuff coming out now for the American Civil Rights Movement for the disabled. In these things, you have faces and brains. And the face, and she also had a brain, was a woman named Judy Heumann, and she recently passed away. And my father passed away 12 years ago. He was the brains behind it. And he said, don't be in the spotlight, be in the background. So my father, being a double amputee, what I like to say is a man with no legs taught me how to stand proud and walk tall. And he was in a time where people who were disabled, they were not expected to do what he accomplished. It was very much like a regulation. And it's really interesting because one of the things of the civil rights movement for disabled and the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion is that they did not want you to see the disability. They wanted you to see the individual. So when you see things, and I'm here saying like, what do you mean you don't see this? What do you mean you don't see it? Well, I was raised with somebody who was a leader of the civil rights movement for disabled, where I don't want you to see me in a wheelchair. I don't want you to see that I'm a man with no legs. I want you to see me. That just happens to be, a part of my identity, but see me. And that's how I see people. So he really inspired and influenced me. And it's also kind of a challenge because I have a very diverse family. I have my brother has special needs. I have interracial brothers and sisters who are 20 years younger than me. My parents were split. So when people look at me, you guys can't really see me now. I'm blonde hair, blue eyes, Caucasian. What do I know about diversity? And the joke I used to like to say is, hey, come over for Thanksgiving, because my full family is diverse. We live it every day. So my father really, really the biggest influence in my life. His name's Fred Francis. I'll tell you, if I can tell you a cool story. I was in Lexington, Kentucky, and I did a keynote. I do a keynote that says, are you ready to rethink? And it's about busting stereotypes. So I say, when you look at me, what do you see? And there's things you see as a cover of a book or judge based upon the words on the page. And I say, you shouldn't do that. You need to look at life like an English teacher. We don't judge a book by its cover. We don't judge based upon the words of the face. We look for deeper meaning. So I showed a picture of my father in a wheelchair and double amputee and shared his story and said, you wouldn't know that by just looking at me. And what I found out was that they teach my father and his accomplishments of the American Civil Rights Movement for the disabled in Kentucky as part of their curriculum. And I found this out because people were like, oh, that was a very moving keynote. I don't keynote usually. I usually do workshops. I don't put on a show. I don't take you to church. I take you to school when I do training, I like to say. But the great thing about it was that somebody put on Twitter and said, yeah, we teach his father down here in Kentucky, in Lexington. And I was like, what? So I said, can you meet me? And the great thing about that was I did this keynote, I might get choked up, but the day after the 12th anniversary of his death. And, the day before, my mom and I were talking about it and said, how much we miss him. And then I found out about this and I called up my mom and I said, Mom, they teach his advocacy down here as part of the curriculum for social studies for the civil rights movement. And she started choking up and saying, that's how your father wanted to be remembered. So I look at that, but it's also given me a kind of an impression in life where, I saw a man who was a double amputee do things that a man with legs probably chooses not to do. I mean, I saw him do a lot of great things. So that really taught me that anything is possible and anything can be accomplished. And I take that not only professionally in my life, that anything's possible. We all can rise above. We all can be what we aspire to be and not even realize who we can be. But also, we can also become people that are great and do great things. And I take a lot of that from my dad. So that is the biggest inspiration for me.
So you've had a history. You've worked at the Department of Ed. You've worked in multiple states. You've really got a big network out there. If you probably know someone who ought to be here at this conference, what would you say to help convince them that this is where they can spend their time, their resources next year? They ought to join us.
I'm going to be very honest with you. There has to be a why to be here. The unfortunate thing sometimes when you do this as a business, the why you do it is more for opportunity than giving back, than service. And what I try to do is I try to make it more service oriented. And why you would come here is, what can you do to give back to this community? What can you do to give back to these small towns? What can you do to be to address and handle and maybe even resolve some of the situations there? It has to be purposeful. It should not be opportunistic. And really, and I'll admit to you, there's some people who will say, "Oh, that's too remote. I'm not going to go there." And that's just not the right attitude. Is that you're here to help people, you're here to help kids. And sometimes even as someone who's a professional development provider, writes books, you're kind of going into a different area. It's kind of like similar to when I went to work for the State Department. It's like, now I wasn't education, now I was government. So now with this writing books and doing professional development, now you're not really education, you're entrepreneurial. Some people don't like that. But I think it's more so like, what can you give back? I've worked with a number of rural communities here in Arizona. I had that fortune. I've worked with Nogales for a number of years, did some great things. I did some work in Sierra Vista. I've worked up here in the north with a few schools. And really, to tell you the truth, a lot of my greatest stories that I share when I present came from those experiences. I would say, if you're coming here, don't look at it as an opportunity. Look at it more so as what can I contribute? How can I serve? And I think that's the whole thing about, don't go here with money in your eyes and, dollar signs. Go here to say, what can I give back? And, between you and me, I'd also probably be very selective about who I choose, because you don't need cheerleaders coming in here and going rah, rah, rah and telling you you're wonderful, you're great, and you walk out enlightened and it disappears the next day. You need someone here who's willing to work with you, who's willing to get in, the dirt with you, get in and come back. It's not a one and done. And that's why I think, what I would do probably to say, like, okay, what can you do to give back to this community? What can you do to support this community? Not just what can you do to get an opportunity to say, hey, I was in this place and I got paid this amount of money.
All right. Those are our questions.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
There were some great insights there. I appreciate that.
You got it. You got it.
Thank you so much for listening to The Rural Scoop. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. And be sure to follow on Twitter at Dr. Sadorf. That's Dr_SADORF, so that you never miss a new release. You can also check out previous episodes of The Scoop wherever you get your podcasts. Production support for the Rural Scoop is provided by Chattanooga Podcast Studios. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education.